Do you remember the last thing you said before you lost someone? Now imagine saying your last words, knowing the whole world will hear, "I will return, and you will recognize me." That's what he said. His voice was drawn out, his eyes fixed on the one who condemned him. He didn't tremble. He didn't cry. I just stared. The needle was approaching. The silence was absolute, as if time had stopped to listen. These were not words thrown to the wind. They were a curse. The question is inevitable. Why would someone choose to say that? Seconds before they die? We are not talking about regret, not even peace, but of dark confessions, veiled accusations, threats whispered in the ear of the end itself. Words so full of pain and mystery that they did not die with their owners. They remained alive. They infiltrated psychiatric reports, prosecutors' notes, recordings muffled by concrete walls. Last words of murderers. Not the ones the media romanticizes, but the real ones, the documented ones, the ones that made witnesses tremble, those who challenged the system, the families of the victims and death itself. Have you ever wondered what goes on in the mind of someone who is about to be executed? What kind of thoughts form when time runs out, when there are no more excuses, no more second chances? What you're about to discover may surprise you, because some of these phrases don't ask for forgiveness. They accuse, they mock, they confess something that was never revealed in court, that they are fragments of a ruined mind or a buried truth. And sometimes they are just a reflection of an absolute void. Some said they were at peace, others who would return for revenge. There were those who quoted the Bible, and there were those who laughed until the last second. But one thing unites them all. No one forgot what they said. Neither do the jailers, neither do journalists, not even the victims, who were still alive to hear it, because there is something perversely human about these moments. A last glimmer of control, a final chance to leave. A scar on the world. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever heard something you couldn't forget? Something that haunted you for days, for years, inside? A murderer's last words are not just words. They are codes, they are signs, they are portraits of collapse. And perhaps these are the only sincere words these people have ever said in their entire lives. What you are about to hear is not just a list of convicts. It is a dive into the final seconds of men and women who had already lost everything except their own voice. And what did they do with that voice? Will haunt you. Now close your eyes. Listen. Because what comes next was actually said. He didn't apologize. He didn't hesitate. Richard Ramirez, the man who transformed California nights into rituals of pure terror, walked through the courtroom as if parading through a temple he himself built. His posture was rigid, but not out of fear. It was theatrical, almost mocking, as if the act of being tried were just another provocation. The looks surrounding him were of disgust, anger, and despair. But he only saw an audience. When the prosecutor read the death sentence, Ramirez smiled. Not a nervous smile or one of regret, but a straight, cold, soulless smile. Something between mockery and satisfaction. It was as if, for him, that moment was a reward, the recognition that he had truly become the monster he'd always cultivated. During the process, he drew pentagrams on the palm of his hand. He made satanic signs for the cameras. He said he loved suffering. But it was at the end, when death was seconds away, that he chose the phrase that would become embedded in the bones of those who heard it. "I am the devil." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't whispered. It was stated. As if revealing a secret kept for ages, a hidden truth that only he knew. And at that moment, no one laughed. Not even the most skeptical, because the way he said it froze the atmosphere. For criminal psychology, Ramirez is one of those cases that defies simple labels. He wasn't just a killer. He was a complete system of distortions, traumas, and beliefs. A man shaped by abuse, violence, and an adolescence steeped in macabre influences. and who transformed all of this into a worship of chaos itself. What many don't know is that Richard Ramirez had a structured mind. Even shrouded in delusions and diabolical symbolism, he thought clearly. He knew what he was provoking. He knew the impact of every word. He understood that people's minds are fragile when confronted with the unknown. And it was there that he built his identity, in the vacuum between logic and fear. Saying, "I am the devil," at the time of his execution wasn't an impulse. It was a strategy. It was the final gesture of someone who wanted to be remembered, not as a human, but as an entity. The phrase still circulates in forums, documentaries, and books. Not for its content, but for the symbolic meaning it carries. It encapsulates the definitive transformation of a man into a mythological figure of evil. For some, this is just psychopath theater. For others, it's the final confession of someone who had lost their way long ago. But there's a third interpretation, that the sentence is actually a silent indictment. Not just of him, but of us. Of what society has ignored, allowed, and cultivated. What lurks behind the scenes of abandonment, alienation, and emotional starvation. Because monsters like Ramirez don't appear out of nowhere. They are created, nurtured, and released. And sometimes, if we look too closely, we can see fragments of him in places we'd rather not face. The phrase resonates because it points to an uncomfortable truth. Evil doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it originates from within. And when someone says, "I am the devil," with that certainty, perhaps the scariest thing is not believing. Maybe it's realizing that, deep down, we already knew. That last sentence wasn't just a provocation. It was a mirror. And mirrors, when broken, do not lose their reflection. They just multiply. But Ramirez's sentence was just the first. There are others, some filled with contempt, others sunk in silence. There were those who used their last seconds to try an impossible hit. And there were those who chose mockery as a farewell. The line between truth and manipulation is never clear when it comes to someone who is killed, but what comes next shows that, even on the brink of death, there are those who prefer to destroy rather than accept. And there are words that, no matter how much the body erases them, remain alive like open wounds. He didn't ask for anything. No prayer, no compassion, no last cigarette. Carl Panzram just wanted everything done right. No delays, no theatrics. The night before his execution, he refused any farewell ritual. He said he didn't need comfort. That comfort was an invention of the weak. He preferred to write raw words, spat out like stones. Sentences filled with rage and contempt for everything he had known as humanity. The letter wasn't an apology. It was a sentence against the world. Each line revealed a hidden truth that few were willing to read. He had become what the world taught him from an early age. Raped by adults, beaten in institutions, thrown like trash from one cell to the next. He didn't learn affection. He didn't learn restraint. He learned survival. And in Panzram's twisted universe, survival meant striking before being struck. Killing was easy. Living. No. That's what he said. No tremor in her voice. No guilt in her eyes. And for the first time, those listening to him understood what he was really saying. There was something deeply disturbing about that sentence. Because it didn't justify, it exposed. As if he were revealing the dirty behind the scenes of what violence can create when it's forced down our throats from day one. A mind trained in pain can only breathe within chaos. Outside of that, everything. Suffocates. Carl Panzram killed more than 20 people officially. But he himself said the true count would never be discovered. His tone wasn't one of pride, it was cold. As if he were simply listing tasks completed. No remorse, no stumbles in his memory. Just the acknowledgement of a trajectory that was never redeemed, didn't even try to be. The most shocking thing is that, amid the explicit brutality of his crimes, there was a sharp conscience. He understood the system. He knew where the flaws lay. He knew how to manipulate, how to frighten, how to make fear an extension of his own breathing. And most importantly, he knew that the real punishment wasn't death. It was continuing to live. For him, being alive was the cruelest punishment. As he was about to be tied up, he looked the executioner in the eye and said, "Hurry it up, you bastard. I could kill 10 of you before I drop dead." The phrase wasn't a provocation. It was a reminder, because he had done exactly that before. Violence was no longer a resource for him. It was language. As officers took turns to contain the tension, the atmosphere grew thick, almost unbreathable. Not because of what he was about to suffer, but because of what he was about to leave behind. Because the death of someone like Panzram is no simple relief. She is a reminder that the system fails even before the first sentence. He grew up in reformatories that resembled psychological death camps. He was beaten by priests, abandoned by those who were supposed to protect him, and locked in cages from adolescence onward. The outcome was no surprise. It was a consequence, forced transformation, from boy to predator. The execution was swift, but what was left afterward didn't come out. Prison officers who were present reported that he laughed until the very last second, not as a mockery, but as if, for the first time, the world were fulfilling a promise. His words were not forgotten because they carried a different kind of pain. It wasn't the victim's suffering or the killer's lament. It was the cry of the complete failure of everything that should have worked. Justice, family, protection, humanity. Everything failed before he failed. Killing was easy. Living, no. This sentence exposes something few people want to face. Not every monster is born ready. Some are molded. And with every choice that is ignored, with every silenced aggression, with every unanswered trauma, what was human is broken, what was possible is closed, and what's left is someone like him. Panzram was not the first, and it wasn't the last, but he was one of the only ones to leave everything in writing. As if he knew that one day someone would open those pages and understand that, behind the horror, there is something even more frightening. The truth that no one wants to admit. After him, others came. Some were silent. Others turned their own death into a stage. But one detail connected them all. None of them wanted to disappear in silence, because silence demands awareness. And some only knew how to exist within the noise. And it is in this noise that the next voice begins to form. Without asking permission. No chance of return. No mask. He stared at the ceiling of the execution chamber as if searching for an explanation that never came. His eyes were dry, but not because he lacked emotion. It was the exhaustion of someone who had screamed until nothing remained inside. Cameron Todd Willingham didn't ask for mercy. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He simply said, "I didn't do it." And the needle went in silently. The case was dismissed with the usual coldness of cases involving fire, dead children, and broken testimony. 3 daughters, all young, died in a brutal fire that destroyed the family home in Texas. The evidence? Suppositions. Soot spots, burn patterns, fragments that were read as if science were infallible. At the time, they said the fire had been intentionally set, that only a cruel father would leave those children locked up to burn alive. The sentence came like a bullet, the death penalty. But years later, the facts began to change. Fire experts, forensic scientists, independent experts, everyone began to deconstruct the basis of the trial. The same evidence used against him was, one by one, deemed outdated, inconclusive, even ridiculous. The conclusions left no doubt. The fire could have been accidental. The marks weren't clear enough to prove a criminal origin. And then came the question that was never undone. Was the executed man innocent? The response was never official. The state never admitted error, but the world around it reacted. Documents were leaked, reports exploded online, and parallel investigations were opened. Cameron Todd Willing's name began to circulate as a symbol of something even more frightening than the crime itself. The real possibility that the system had killed an innocent man, and then everything changes. Because the phrase "I didn't do it" stops being just a denial. It becomes a denunciation. A scream trapped between the teeth of someone who had no time, no space, no real chance to prove otherwise. It wasn't just him who was executed. It was also the trust in the process, the authority that was supposed to protect, the logic that was supposed to filter justice from revenge. The impact of this went beyond prison walls. It reached universities, courts, and families who began revisiting their own trials. How can we trust a sentence when the science used to convict has been discredited? How can we maintain the mindset that the system is infallible when the ashes of 3 girls are scattered throughout a history full of gaps? It's easy to label a murderer when the situation is tragic. Even easier when grief demands an immediate culprit. But the behind-the-scenes story of this case showed that decisions made in the heat of public commotion can become weapons. And once deployed, there's no turning back. During his time in prison, Willingham stuck to his own story. He was called a manipulator, a cold sociopath. But accounts from those who knew him closely on death row paint a different picture, that of a man in a process of erosion, consumed by the powerlessness of shouting at walls that wouldn't listen. What's most disturbing is imagining the silence that followed the execution, not for him, but for those who knew there were flaws: judges, prosecutors, technical witnesses, people who perhaps realized too late that there was no certainty there, just haste, a rush to conclude, a rush to punish, a rush to close the case and ease public pressure. And yet, Cameron didn't curse, he didn't threaten, he didn't cry, he spoke firmly. He repeated, "I didn't do it," as if, even without salvation, there was still something to be preserved. That phrase still lingers in law classrooms, in criminal justice podcasts, and scientific articles questioning the standards used to identify the origin of fires. It became more than a final protest. It became an open scar, a wound that continues to throb, not just for him, but for all the others who may be sitting today, right now, in some cell waiting for a similar outcome. His name is now followed by a question mark, not a period. Cases like this show how much truth can be stifled by the weight of poorly executed decisions, and how the system, when it fails, doesn't just condemn it, perpetuates an error that repeats itself, infiltrates, and adapts. Because justice without the humility to reconsider its own paths isn't justice. It's ego disguised as authority. Willingham's death didn't erase his words. They remain, not as a defense, but as a reminder that horror doesn't always come from the one in the dock. Sometimes he's sitting on the other side, wearing a suit, signing sentences. Ending lives as coldly as he stamps documents. Time passed, but the doubt remained. And this doubt is what fuels the next story, one in which the last words were not a protest, were an undisguised farewell, almost a whisper. But even so, he managed to cross the curtain of death, ... and even with the sentence served, the death certificate signed, and the ashes forgotten by many, that phrase lives on. "I didn't do it," echoing amid debates, investigations, and gazes that can no longer sleep the same way. Because there are words that linger after the person is gone. Words that sow doubt, that refuse to disappear, that demand to be heard, even if it's too late. It's stories like these that make all this matter. For truths that haven't yet been fully revealed, for secrets that remain buried in archives, waiting for the right moment to explode. If you've made it this far, you've felt it. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something deeper. A nagging restlessness. And if you feel it too, then you're already part of this quest. So, it's worth telling you something honestly. Subscribing here isn't just about pressing a button. It's about entering into a silent pact with this content, with every voice that has been silenced, with every story that still needs to be told in the right way. Each subscription shows that there are still people willing to listen, question, and think differently. And that's what keeps this space alive. Subscribe, not because someone told you to, but because what's yet to come may be more disturbing, more revealing, more unexpected than you imagine. There are things that can't yet be said all at once. There are names, phrases, and revelations that only make sense when you return, when you follow along, when you decide to go beyond the surface. And now that you know the voice that claimed innocence, perhaps you're ready to hear what came next. Because the next silence also carries a sentence. But it wasn't a protest, nor a scream. It was something that mixed pain, love, and abandonment, a farewell without a shield. A sentence spoken not to the world, but to someone who never responded. She was called a freak, predator, psychopath. For years, the name Aileen Wuornos became synonymous with everything a woman shouldn't be. 7 men dead, 7 shots, 7 distorted versions of defense, revenge, and survival instinct. The press made her a monster. The courts confirmed that, but the instant the needle approached the vein, it wasn't hatred that escaped her lips. It was fragility. The last thing she said, her voice firm but wounded, was, "Take care of my mother." Silence. There was no mother in the room. There was no forgiveness around. Just that sentence, said with the strength of someone who already understood that he was leaving, but still wanted to leave something whole. It was at that moment that everything clicked. The monstrous figure built up over the years broke. And in its place, something uncomfortable remained. A contrast. A noise, because how can someone capable of killing 7 times, without apparent remorse, end her life speaking like a daughter? The impact of this is not just in what was said, but in the transformation it caused in those who listened. Experienced guards, callous journalists, even those who wanted her dead. They all felt something. Maybe discomfort, maybe doubt, maybe just that emptiness that arises when you realize that things are not as simple as they seem. Aileen Wuornos had a life that even fiction couldn't bear to write. Childhood rape, family abandonment, streets, forced prostitution. She grew up without structure, without affection, without direction. He learned to protect himself with violence before he even understood what affection was. The transformation she underwent was not natural, it was imposed. The world took from her what it could, and she reacted the only way she knew how, by attacking. But on death row, where everything is bare, the mask has fallen. The anger, the coldness, the sarcasm, everything gave way to a remnant of humanity. And she chose not to defend herself. Do not accuse. Do not justify yourself. Just ask for caution. For someone who might not even be alive anymore, or that it even deserved that care. Take care of my mother. It's a phrase that cuts because it doesn't fit the image they made of her. She was no longer the killer at that moment. She was just a broken woman, trying to leave something whole behind. Maybe a memory, maybe just a wish. This contrast is what makes everything harder to process. Aileen was violent. No one denies that. But she was also the result of decisions and violence that came long before she learned to speak. She was punished for what she did, but few people looked at what was done to her. Behind the scenes at the trial, between the lines of the psychiatric reports, there were clear signs of a chronic emotional breakdown. A mind that begged for help but received bars. A story marked by exclusion, absence, and hunger for love. And when the end came, she didn't talk about the crimes, not even about men, not even about the system. He talked about his mother, overcare, about something you never had. But somehow, I still believed it was possible. This is the part that almost no one wants to hear, because it is easier to judge than to understand. It's more comfortable to paint everything with black paint than to admit that even in the deepest darkness, there can be a point of light, even if weak, even if confusing. Aileen didn't say, Goodbye as a monster. She said goodbye as a daughter. And that messes up all certainties. It forces us to look beyond the label. It forces us to face the human being that still existed behind the sentence. Maybe that's why you're here. Because these stories don't provide easy answers. They provoke. They make you think. And if, until now, you felt this truth, this pain hidden between the lines, then I need to tell you, this type of content needs people like you. Subscribing here is more than just watching videos. It's giving voice to stories that deserve to be told in depth. It's about keeping a space alive, where sensationalism doesn't swallow complexity. It's helping to dig deep where most people don't want to look. Your registration shows that there is still an audience for this, for the truth, without makeup, for the names that no one remembers, for the details the media buried. So, if this makes sense to you, stay with me, because what is yet to come carries the same weight, the same tension, and maybe an even deeper abyss. Stay with me until the end, because the last words you'll hear today weren't said to shock you. They were said by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. And that, even in the face of death, chose to laugh. He said that in a firm voice, but it wasn't a scream. It was almost a whisper that was loaded with something heavier than hate. I'm innocent, but it doesn't matter. And of all the sentences that were said in that court, that was the only one that still lives on. Nicolas Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti were not common criminals. There was no blood on the hands. There was no history of violence. What was there was a scenario tainted by another kind of judgment, more subtle, more corrosive, more fatal. Two Italian immigrants in the United States in the 1920s. Two faces that, for the newspapers of the time, carried the perfect form of the enemy, not by the gun, but by the name, by the accent, by the ideology, the crime. An armed robbery followed by murder. The proof? Almost none. Ballistics disputed. Fragile witnesses. Contradictions ignored. But the verdict was already sealed before the trial even began. The political world wanted a message. And Sacco and Vanzetti turned the envelope. The impact was immediate. Protests broke out in the four corners of the world. Intellectuals, writers, activists, everyone pointed out the flaws, the loopholes, the rush, but nothing stopped the machine. When the state wants to show strength, the truth becomes a detail. They were condemned, sentenced to death, and they died. But before that, they left words, not to convince the jury, not to appeal to the governor, but for the future, for anyone who, one day, needed to hear it. I'm innocent, but it doesn't matter. It's a sentence that rips the ground out, because there is no defense against indifference. At the time of execution, the two walked without resisting. Witnesses say Vanzetti was calm. Sacco, silent. They didn't beg, they didn't cry, they didn't ask for anything, because they knew they had already lost before they even started fighting. And when the electric chair did its job, the screams didn't come from them, they came from outside. From the squares, from international newspapers, from the manifestos that crossed oceans. The indignation did not die with the bodies. On the contrary, it spread like wildfire. Decades later, official recognition came. The state of Massachusetts admitted that the trial was flawed, that political pressure contaminated everything, that justice was not served. But there was nothing left to save. Sacco and Vanzetti had been dead for over 50 years, and the apology letter arrived too late. The most devastating thing wasn't the mistake. It was time. The number of lives that continued believing the lie. The construction of an official truth sustained by silence, authority, and convenience. Because admitting a miscarriage of justice doesn't bring anyone back to life, but it exposes the rot of a system that sometimes prefers to protect its own image rather than do what is right. The mentality that condemned them still exists. It's behind the scenes of rushed processes. In the selectivity of those who investigate. In prejudice disguised as impartiality. In choosing who is entitled to the benefit of the doubt. Sacco and Vanzetti became symbols, not by choice, but because no one else wanted to bear the weight of omission. They knew their deaths would not be in vain. They knew the transformation would come late, but it would come. And it came. In the books. In the movies. In discussions about what justice really means. Vanzetti's final sentence, spoken to a reporter, with his execution already scheduled, carries a disturbing piece. I am not innocent only in this case. I have never killed. I have never stolen, and I'm not guilty. But my punishment is not for that. It's because of who I am. This hidden truth was little by little being illuminated. And now, so many years later, it still burns. Because knowing that the system killed 2 innocent men is not just ancient history. It's a mirror of yesterday, of today, and perhaps of what is yet to come. Their legacy is not of blood. It's voice. A voice that, despite being silenced, continues to echo in every hasty decision, in every sentence tainted by prejudice. They're gone. But the doubt, the impact, and the need for vigilance remained. That's why staying here is more than just following a case. It is recognizing that these names, these phrases, these open wounds, are part of a story that is still being written. With errors. With choices, with consequences that often don't fit into a 5-minute report. And you, who have listened this far, already carry part of this memory, because every word that survives a performance becomes something greater. Something that spans decades, something that demands to be remembered. And the next story. Is marked by a type of coldness that requires no explanation, a short, almost banal phrase, but which revealed a mind that laughed at the darkness itself. There was no longer any sparkle in his eyes. No charm in the voice, not a trace of that rehearsed air that fooled so many victims. Lawyers, reporters, Ted Bundy was near the end, but even with his weakened body, even with his haggard face, his presence still carried something difficult to explain. A void filled with calculation. An absence of regret that made everything seem even more repulsive. In the last few hours, he spoke with pauses. Carefully. Like someone who measures each word to leave a precise scar. And that's when he uttered a phrase that seems to have crossed time like a blade. I would become all of that again. It wasn't provocation. It was not mockery. It was a realization. Almost like someone who reviews a strategic decision and comes to the conclusion that, even with the tragic outcome, they would do everything the same. Bundy knew everyone was listening. I knew there were cameras, recorders, biographies in the making, but he did not shape his speech to evoke pity, not even to stage redemption. He used the end as a mirror, and he showed who he really was from the beginning, a predator at peace with its own monstrosity. The most disconcerting thing was always the duality he embodied. Educated, articulate, charismatic. He seemed incapable of violence until the bodies started appearing, until the patterns revealed themselves. Until the backstage exploded, and the world discovered that there was a mind trained in manipulation, sharp in lying, expert in appearing normal. He was not driven by anger, not even on impulse. It was method. Frieza. A mental construct that made him see the other as an object, something to be exploited, destroyed, and discarded. During interrogations, Bundy gambled. Sometimes it said everything. Sometimes I would go back. He confused dates, distorted names, laughed at the gaps he left on purpose. It was as if he wanted to maintain control, even over what would be discovered about him after his death. But in that final sentence, the game stopped. There were no more masks, just a reflection. Raw, unbearable, sincere. I would become all of that again. This carries a different weight, because it reveals that, for him, what he did was not an accident. It was a choice. Repeated. Calculated. And, in the end, reaffirmed. It's the kind of confession that doesn't come with tears. It comes with surgical precision. Like a definitive sentence on who he was, and who he always wanted to be. Bundy was not a Mistake on society that it was an outlier, a silent collapse that learned to smile as it destroyed. And the most dangerous thing about him was not his ability to kill. It was the ability to appear trustworthy. While hiding the abyss beneath the surface, even in the final minutes, he did not truly ask for forgiveness. He made vague references to God, to faith, to a supposed attempt at repentance. But it all sounded artificial. As if even the very end were just another performance, a final script in which he still saw himself as the protagonist. When the reporters left that room, many said the same thing. Bundy didn't look afraid. He seemed satisfied, not with what would come, but with what he knew he had left. Confusion, morbid fascination, and mainly, a doubt that he cultivated with pleasure. How many truths did he still hide? Because the truth, in his case, was never complete. It was always shaped, rehearsed, and measured with precision. Even in confessions, there were omissions. Even in the revelations, there was a game. This mindset of absolute control, of structured coldness, of absence of empathy, is what defines psychopathy in its most dangerous form. It's not the impulse that scares. That's the logic behind it. It is the ability to appear human, without ever, in fact, being. The impact of this reverberates to this day. Not just in movies, series, books. But in criminology studies, in forensic psychology classes, in the hushed conversations between experts still trying to understand how someone can look back on everything they've caused. And still say, I would do it all over again. This confession is more than an ending. It's a warning that there are things that cannot be explained only by trauma, misery, or abandonment. Sometimes, evil wears a smiling face, and he walks among us as if he were part of the landscape. No rush. No guilt. No trace. And while you digest this, it might be worth remembering that there is more. Minds as dangerous as phrases, as disturbing as decisions that changed not only a life, but the way we view justice, punishment, and conscience. And the next one didn't come from the mouth of a murderer. It came from someone who simply disappeared. But before that, he said something that no one has been able to explain to this day. And even after his death, he continued to influence conversations, theories, suspicious glances, and heavy silences. His phrase remained not as a cry of revolt, but as a mirror of what many pretend not to see, that there are people who don't want to be saved, that there are minds so disconnected from empathy that they can coldly laugh at their own trail of destruction. And this idea is frightening, because deep down we all want to believe there's a reason, an origin, a rational explanation, something that gives meaning to the absurd. But there isn't always, and this is where many people get stuck, because facing the existence of someone like Bundy, someone who says he would do it all over again, naturally requires more than curiosity. It requires emotional courage. If at some point you too have felt this muffled pain, this strangled discomfort, perhaps it is time to put it into words. Write just one thing in the comments. I saw emptiness. Not for me. But for yourself. To mark that you went through this part, that you understood the weight, and that it touched you in some way. It may seem like a small detail, but when someone reads this type of comment, they realize they are not alone. In this reflection, there is strength in that. It has belonging. There's truth. And if you want to open up more, write. Vent. There's single quotes S room here. There are people who will understand. There are stories that hurt more than we admit. And when someone shares that pain, it transforms. Here, every sincere comment is part of the memory we are building together. Each sentence left is like a piece of something that doesn't fit in the video, but needs to stay alive, because there's more to come. And the next words you will hear came from someone who seemed to already know how would die in silence. But he chose to break that silence with a truth that no one had the courage to answer. The silence that descended on death row had no room for laughter. John Wayne Gacy, the man who for years donned the clown costume to approach his victims, didn't wear the mask in that final hour. There was no joke. No smile to calm the audience, no trick to divert their gaze. Just a tired man. And a sentence that seemed to carry the weight of an entire world, even though it was spoken in a low, almost muffled voice. Pray for me. I'm going to hell. It wasn't a plea for mercy. It wasn't a plea. It was an assumed sentence. A confession that, while seemingly desperate, carried a strange acceptance. Gacy knew the place he was going wasn't a secret. He had built it himself, brick by brick, with blood and deceit. That moment brought no redemption, no hope. It was the final impact of a mind that had toyed with evil to its limit. Behind the makeup and stage jokes lay a dark truth, a mindset that thrived on control and manipulation. Gacy was a master at creating false appearances, at hiding monstrosity beneath a facade of normalcy. And this contrast between the laughing clown and the ruthless killer is what makes his final words even more charged with meaning. It's the internal struggle of someone who recognizes the abyss, but knows there's no way back. Ultimately, his words echo the complexity of guilt and the fear of eternal damnation, elements that permeate many human stories, but which gain brutal intensity when spoken by those who have lived with darkness. The religiosity that shines through is not light. It is heavy, almost suffocating, as if Gacy were about to face not only physical death, but a much deeper judgment. The knowledge that there is no escape from what he himself has wrought. This final confession sheds a different light on the character, revealing the invisible weight that guilt can carry, even for those who seem insensitive to the suffering of others. It's a transformation that occurs in the final moment, an inevitable confrontation between the past and one's own essence. Gacy didn't run away. He faced, albeit enigmatically, his destiny. But beyond the phrase itself, it's impossible not to consider the impact this statement has on the listener. The image of the killer clown, who marked so many lives with terror and deceit, suddenly merges with the image of a man who admits his own downfall. This shakes our perception, forcing us to navigate between fear, revulsion, and a tenuous sense of lost humanity. Behind the scenes of this moment, there are also revelations that remain hidden. Details of how he prepared himself, the last thoughts, recorded by guards and psychologists, the attempts perhaps frustrated to find some shred of genuine remorse. Each fragment paints a picture that goes beyond the simple act of execution. It's an immersion into the complexity of the criminal mind, the silent struggle with the consequences. And this is one of the great truths, hidden behind the last words of the condemned. They are not just final phrases. They are accounts of a transformation that occurs on the threshold between life and death, revelations that can change the way we understand decisions, fear, and existence itself. When Gacy said that, he wasn't seeking sympathy. He wasn't trying to manipulate the audience one last time. He signed off with a somber warning, a confession that felt more like a farewell to the world and to himself. A plea for someone, somewhere, to remember that the hell that awaited him wasn't just a place, but the result of the choices he made. And that sentence, spoken with that unsettling calm, leaves a shadow that lingers. Because what does it mean to go to hell? Where does this journey begin? And what's left for those who listen? These questions remain alive, pulsing in the minds of those who seek to understand not only the crimes, but the people behind them. In thinking about this, we are invited to reflect on the limits of redemption, guilt, and forgiveness, on the impact of decisions that shape destinies, and on how every story, no matter how dark, has layers that deserve to be explored, even when the truth seems untouchable. Meanwhile, the next voice we hear brings a different confession, less religious, perhaps more direct. A final sentence that touches on the essence of injustice, silence, and resistance. A sentence that, though short, carries immense weight and continues to provoke profound reflection. The sentence cut through the silence, like a cold blade. The body is where it all began. It wasn't just any whisper. It was the last breath of someone who knew too much, or who at least wanted to leave one last enigma before the definitive silence. The convict, whose name was never revealed to the public, did not expect clemency. He knew that the lethal injection would be the last chapter of his story, but he decided that he would not leave without casting a shadow, a clue, a truth that no one could ignore. What he said resonates to this day, because it goes far beyond the obvious. It's not just a phrase to mark the final moment. It's a warning. An invitation to look back. To relive the beginning. To question what seemed closed. But there's the problem. The body never appeared. It was never found. It disappeared into the void of investigations, into the limbo of archives, among the gaps that bureaucracy tries to hide. And this absence is what turns everything into an incomplete mystery, a puzzle with missing pieces, a silence that screams. The case that seemed closed was reopened. More than that, hell returned to haunt those involved in the investigation. Because when the body disappears, when what was supposed to be proof disappears, what remains is doubt. And where there is doubt, fear sets in. Fear that the truth has been buried, not with the body, but under the weight of omissions and secrets. This kind of mystery touches on a wound that doesn't heal. The impact that the unknown has on victims, their families, and even on the justice system itself. The growing feeling of injustice, that something was done in a hurry, without due care, that a fundamental piece to close the cycle disappeared, leaving the past open, pulsating, incomplete. Behind the scenes, there is talk of investigations that cross-reference documents, testimonies, and even unofficial excavations. Reports from those who saw, heard, suspected, but they never confirmed what everyone wanted to find: the body. Silence was what remained. The transformation of this case, then, is not in the crime itself, but in what came after. In the decisions that were made to try to hide or protect something. In the mindset of those who, perhaps, preferred to bury uncomfortable truths. In the complex game between what is public and what remains behind the scenes. That sentence, so short, so direct, carries enormous weight. Not only because it implies a hidden story, but because it reveals a final wish that someone uncover what was left behind. And this stirs the collective imagination, our desire for answers. We want to understand, we want justice, we want to close the cycle. But what happens when the cycle never closes? When what should be the end becomes a beginning? That's where the mystery turns into something bigger. Something that touches not only the victims, but all of us who witness, think, and feel. This paradox between physical closure and the perpetuation of the enigma creates an invisible but powerful tension, a feeling that, even in the face of the final sentence, there is still something to reveal, something that can change the entire perception of history. And that's the essence of what makes real cases so disturbing. Every word spoken before death is a piece of the puzzle we try to put together. But sometimes, this piece is a black hole that sucks up all certainties, leaving only restlessness. What happened to that body? Why was he never found? Who knows the answer, and why hide it? As we try to understand, we are invited to reflect on the decisions that shape justice and truth, about the impact of failures, omissions, and choices that remain hidden behind the scenes. Because, at the end of the day, every story has layers that can only be revealed when we have the courage to look at what lies beneath the surface. Stay with me until the end. Because what you'll see next further challenges what we understand by justice, truth, and punishment. And perhaps, along this journey, you will discover that last words are not just final, but doors to worlds no one ever wanted to open. Timothy McVeigh did not seek redemption. There were no tears or regrets in his last words. Instead, what came was a cold, calculated warning that reverberated far beyond the prison walls. I hope you live with that. The phrase echoes like a silent curse, a heavy reminder to an entire nation. McVeigh bore the responsibility for one of the most devastating attacks in American history, the Oklahoma City bombing, which destroyed lives, families, and the sense of security of an entire population. But he showed no remorse. He didn't ask for forgiveness. His last words were a mirror of the mindset that guided his actions, a shocking coldness, an unshakable conviction, a resolve that was born somewhere dark and never wavered. This phrase is not just a cry of anger or an insult, it is a burden of responsibility placed on those left behind, on the survivors, on the families of the victims, on a society that must deal with the trauma and social impact left by this tragedy. It's a way of saying that the weight of what happened doesn't end with his execution. On the contrary, it is a legacy that lives, that hurts, that transforms everyone. The impact of this confession goes beyond words. It highlights the depth of collective pain, the difficulty of overcoming horror, and the constant struggle to find true justice amidst the chaos. It's a phrase that shakes our understanding of guilt, responsibility, and what it means to bear the consequences of one's actions, even after death. The coldness with which McVeigh delivered this curse reveals a mind unmoved by the final judgment. He decided his destiny with full awareness, accepting that his story would be marked not by the search for forgiveness, but by the imposition of a burden on others. This cold, almost mechanical mentality defies any attempt to humanize their actions or seek simple motives. Yet it is in this contrast between the brutality of the act and the coldness of the confession that lies one of the greatest mysteries of criminal psychology. How can someone plan and execute such devastation and yet remain impervious to the weight of remorse? How do you turn hate into such a destructive weapon and yet maintain the conviction that its legacy will be a perpetual warning? The backdrop of this final moment is marked by silent tension. As the technicians prepared everything, as the guards maintained the cold routine of death row, McVeigh chose his words carefully, almost as a final act of control. He knew the reach of his voice, the strength of his message, and he didn't hesitate to make it clear that he had no regrets, that his decision was aligned with a mindset that challenged common understandings of guilt and redemption. This last sentence became a point of reflection on social responsibility and the impact of individual decisions. It is a somber invitation to analyze not only the man, but the entire context that allowed such a tragedy to happen. It's a stark reminder that evil often hides behind ideologies, traumas, and choices that take root in a fertile ground of pain and anger. And for those who follow these stories, the question that never gets old remains: how to transform this coldness into learning? How can we prevent the weight of these words from continuing to generate more pain? How do you move forward when the past insists on casting such deep shadows? That's where the importance of understanding what's behind the scenes lies: the mind, the transformation, the decisions that precede the final act. Because only then can we see beyond the surface and grasp the hidden truth, that tenuous thread that connects crime to the human condition. This journey is painful, but necessary, because true justice does not arise solely from punishment, but from reflection and the impact we have on the way we see the world. This voice that defies silence isn't just a final word. It's a door that opens to secrets many have tried to hide. Secrets that make us question everything about justice, punishment, and truth. And that's precisely why continuing this journey together makes all the difference. Here, each story reveals more than facts. It uncovers hidden layers, transformations in mindset, and the decisions that shape destinies, often in surprising ways. If you've ever felt that burning curiosity for answers, that need to understand what lies beneath the surface, know that this is just the beginning. The channel is a space where these hidden truths are not forgotten. Each video is designed to stir your mind, challenge your beliefs, and provoke that restlessness that makes you think beyond the obvious. And the only way to ensure these stories reach you, that this impact continues to grow, is through your presence here, following and being part of this community that seeks more than entertainment, that seeks meaning. Subscribing is more than clicking a button. It's a silent commitment to the unknown, a way to ensure that the next secret, the next confession, the next twist, reaches you at just the right time. Because every word, every revelation, can change the way you see the world, and it doesn't. And there, the curiosity you feel now is the same that will drive us to explore together the mysteries yet to come. So, stay close, stay tuned. Because this journey isn't just mine or yours, it's ours, a connection that grows stronger with every story told, every truth exposed, every piece of the past we gain the courage to face. Subscribing here means being open to what no one else wants to face, preparing for the unexpected, accepting the invitation to understand the shadows that live among us. And before we continue, I invite you to stay with us until the end. Because what comes next will challenge your perception even further and leave you with questions that will echo far beyond this video. Velma Barfield was no ordinary voice on death row. She was the first woman to be executed after the death penalty was reintroduced in the United States, a milestone that carried not only the tension of the end of life, but the weight of a history that spanned generations. When she spoke her last words, it was not with fear or explicit regret, but with a phrase that remained etched in the memory of those nearby: "You will see me in your dreams." It wasn't a request nor a plea. It was something deeper, a kind of warning, a whisper laden with mystery and a tension that transcended the physical and entered the psychological realm. The nurses who witnessed the moment couldn't close their eyes that night. The phrase reverberated in their minds like an invisible presence, a silent trauma that refused to be ignored. Some swear they felt something more, a shiver down their spine that wouldn't fade with the passage of time. This feeling that final words can carry a weight beyond the obvious isn't unique to Velma. The mystery surrounding her words opens a door to the unknown, to that which we cannot prove, but which insists on stirring our deepest emotions. The line between the real and the supernatural, between the conscious and the unconscious, seems to blur in that final moment, as if death were merely the beginning of another kind of existence, or perhaps the start of an internal struggle that is not easily erased. Velma carried a complex history of pain, addiction, and crime, but her final words suggest that beyond what meets the eye lay something darker, a hidden dimension few dare explore. This idea provokes reflection on the transformation that occurs not only in the body, but also in the mind and spirit as we approach the end. It's as if execution, more than a physical act, was a portal to truths we often prefer to keep locked away. The impact of this sentence goes beyond immediate fear. It highlights the weight of the psychological trauma, not only for the convict, but also for those close to her, who bear the responsibility of bearing witness and living with the silence that followed. This invisible tension that sets in after her final words is a true portrayal of the behind-the-scenes workings of the prison system, where the line between life and death is thinner than we imagine. Between the lines of this moment, it's possible to capture revelations about the human mind at its most extreme. As a final message, Velma seems to want to say that death doesn't erase everything, that there are echoes that linger, memories that refuse to fade, and a presence that somehow lives on in the minds of those left behind. This idea transforms the execution into something that transcends the physical, bringing to the fore the debate about the soul, the unconscious, and the limits of our understanding. As we reflect on this, we are invited to question what the end truly means, whether the final words are simply that, or whether they carry a hidden truth that challenges our perception. It's an invitation to look beyond appearances, to the details that often go unnoticed, to the decisions and transformations that occur in the shadows behind the scenes. Velma Barfield left more than one sentence. She left a mystery that spans decades, a sign that stories involving the end of life can be much more complex than they seem. It's this complexity, this mix of pain, fear, mystery, and revelation that makes us want to understand more, to delve deep into the minds of those who were on the brink of death and emerged with something to say. If you've made it this far, it means this story stirred something within you, perhaps a restlessness, a doubt, or that feeling that not everything is as it seems. This type of content is designed precisely to provoke this awakening, to question established truths and reveal the shadows many try to hide. Therefore, it's worth sticking around, following every detail, because the journey is long and full of revelations that can transform the way you see the world around you. If you want to be part of this journey, this is the place to do it. Signing up isn't just a click, it's a way to ensure these stories keep reaching you, that the investigation continues, and that justice, even when delayed, finds its voice. And if any of the words here touched you, how about leaving a comment, saying, "This message was for me"? It's a simple yet powerful way to show that you're part of this quest, this movement that doesn't let things go unnoticed. And since we're talking about connection, a like also helps strengthen this network, this community that understands the importance of questioning, of denouncing conspiracies that attempt to erase truths, and of standing firm in the pursuit of justice. It's not just a digital gesture. It's a way of making noise, of saying we're not alone. Now, for those who want to go further, there's a video here that expands on this topic in a way you might not have seen before. It's a natural continuation of this conversation, full of details and revelations that deserve to be known. So click and stay with me there, because the next part of this story will further challenge your beliefs about truth, justice, and what lies between the lines.